Hey, Brainiacs, quick note before we get into this episode. Sharon Blady is joining me today to talk about Ant-Man Quantumania, and as we often do, the cultural and psychological implications of that story. Speaking of story, we are sticking very closely to discussing the story and things as they are presented in the movie. We are not really talking about Jonathan Majors and the scandal. For anyone who doesn't know, there has been some allegations and some criminal charges having to do with domestic violence type charges. I'm not going to recap any of that or get into it because we are not experts in that area. That's a legal matter for Mr. Majors. He's very pivotally involved in the upcoming phases for Marvel. No idea what Marvel or Disney are going to do. This is just a disclaimer to say that, of course, we stand with any survivors of any violence. Sharon and I are both big believers of that. And at the same time, believers that whatever process is in play should play out. So, no worries if we don't get into that. Now you know why. So please enjoy our analysis of the movie Quantumania.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
I very nearly just clicked on end. That would have been bad.
Ooh.
Although
That's
you
not what we're looking for.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I was like, let me click on record. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The world's shortest podcast. It never happened. The end before the record button.
The shortest episode in the history of the Broken Brain. That's one of my favorite things about reality shows, by the way, is when they say, this is the most dramatic thing that's ever happened in the history of Project Red. You know, as if it's like, yeah.
As if this is some big historical thing in general, like as if the show, as if it matters in the big picture. That's what archaeologists are going to find this 5,000 years later. Okay.
Oh, Sharon, how are you? Great to have you here.
Oh,
there.
Good. Excited about this. I have to say, I really enjoyed Quantumania, and it was one that it was, again, so much fun. So no, it's been busy times, and really grateful for the Marvel breaks that I've had along the way. So that and then Guardians, which we can talk about later.
Yeah, we're going to do one on that
really
too.
Super cool high points.
Yeah, these are both very high points. I would say. We'll talk about that one when we're on that one. Guardians a little more for me, but Quantumania also, as I believe the first movie in Phase 5. Right?
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, and this is it. And I have to admit, sometimes I lose track of the phases.
Yeah.
Between that and Star Wars, where you're like, okay, I got to look up a timeline because I'm not sure.
Well, and I think you and I are alike in this. You could call me a stan for Marvel, I guess, or really. But the thing is, I've actually gotten to a point in my life where almost everything that I consume, media-wise. Almost, not everything, but almost everything I find I'm like looking for the things that are enjoyable. And I just got to this point where I'm like, people making a creative endeavor, I'm in, and I see if I can see what you were trying to do, even if it didn't totally work and you took a swing, I'm just very, so if anybody, if anyone's tuning in to be like, oh, we're going to bust on this thing, it's not that kind of show, obviously.
And for me, so much of it is just the fact that they're exploring it because it's already a rich universe. And then I think, and also the take that the approach that I take, it's similar to when I think of things like, Neil Gaiman is another one where it's the book said this, but the TV show or the movie did that. And it's this idea that, it's about mythology and there's always more than one version of the myth. And that they evolve and that you have different iterations and different versions. And yes, there's the one that we might be most familiar with, but in terms of what's canonical, and that's kind of what I like about, again, the MCU, like Marvel in general, because we already have that in comics just with the multiverse by its very nature.
Absolutely.
But then also this idea of, going into the MCU and going, okay, well, actually we can do these other things.
Yeah.
And that it makes Marvel more accessible. Yeah. Because it allows to gloss over. And I think the one thing that I still love, and I think this is a good example of it, is that you can watch Marvel movies you can literally bring somebody who's never seen anything in the franchise, walk them into one of these movies, and they're, without knowing the huge backstory, can still understand the movie. And I think that's one of the things that I like, as opposed to something where you're like, again, I found myself, Star Wars is a good one, where I didn't go down all the animated paths the way my kids did. And now I find myself sometimes in the middle of watching like The Mandalorian. Who the what? What are they? Oh my God, hold on. Okay. Oh, wait a second. Oh, that was from, this side quest or this other thing. So that's what I love about this one is it's rich, it's complex, it's a lot of backstory. And a lot of character development around family.
And it has
and especially like regret.
Yes. It has also
and do-overs.
The element to, just from a narrative standpoint, for me, just like you say, the MCU is now its own storyline. Just like if there was a new artist and writer for Ant-Man or for Daredevil or whatever, they launch a new storyline that may or may not touch on the others, and there's certain continuity that is there, but not always. So I look at the MCU as just another run of, as we would call it in the comics world. So
it's another run, and it allows people to sort of play in different sandboxes. And what I have to say to that too is when I think about, again, and to me it shows growth and development. Which actually is sort of one of the themes of this movie. There's always room to grow. One of the lines there is this idea that, when you think about, like, for example, Iron Man, the first one out of the gate, there's some character development stuff there, but it is really just a straight superhero movie. It's about the big explosions. Yes, you have Tony Stark having his aha moment. But there's certain things about relationships, but you realize when you get to something like this, just the maturity that's occurred within Marvel and the MCU in terms of, like, this movie is about family. This movie is about regret. It's about change. It's about what if. It's about what I've missed out on, what I'm trying to catch up on. So you see all the different parenting and grandparenting things go on. You also see the edging around communication around what, I didn't think it was important to tell you this. Well, now that we're knee deep in a conqueror in the quantum realm, that would be a cool, and the fact that it's even done in the context. I still love the whole scene where, after the Bill Murray scene and you have the, blah, 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 I had needs, and there's just the hope thing. And, blah, 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 this woman, Linda, and you're like, no, I don't need that. So it was this combination of, you've got the humor of, kid listening to parent, but at the same time, you've got the parents catching up on communication and, oops, I didn't mention this because it wasn't really important. It didn't change, she wasn't you. That kind of thing. And at the same time, kid, la, 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 la.
And interesting.
Really, we're talking about that now.
Very, and getting into the relationships, that's a very interesting exchange you mentioned. And as always, when we talk about these things, this is meant to be an analysis primarily for those who have either seen this or don't care so much about spoilers, because spoilers abound. At the point where they are, and they're in the midst of running around, and you get Hank and Michelle Pfeiffer's character. Oh my gosh. What is her name? Janet. There we go.
Janet, well, and that's the other part. We finally get to see her and get her whole backstory and just the whole, So grandma does have some baggage around this, and she's not really comfortable with what she did. And, she's happy to be back. Didn't think it was going to bleed out, so didn't feel the need to mention it.
And it was fascinating to see that little exchange between them where, and I think that we expect them to really play up certain aspects in movies where it's like, okay, now here's the part where Hank gets jealous. And not that there wasn't a touch, but interestingly enough, when he says to her, like, that guy? And she's like, hey, I was alone for 30 years. And he's like, that's not the problem. that guy sucks, basically. And both of them acknowledge, like, we were apart for 30 years and you thought I was dead. And I thought I was trapped here for life. And we moved, there were certain aspects that they immediately, forgave's not the right word, but just accept about each other's experience.
It's like it's irrelevant. We were in totally different places, never thought we were going to see each other again. So we literally accepted the situation we were in and moved on accordingly. And it doesn't mean anything it wasn't, a conscious act of cheating, sneaking out the back door.
It wasn't anything like that at all. And there was an immediate, like, acceptance of each other's situation, support. And it reminds me, one of the things that Marvel can definitely be accused of, just like any of these comic book storylines, is if someone's happy, if someone says it's good to have friends or I love you 3000 or something like that, that's a death sentence, right? Usually.
Exactly.
And particularly, or if
we've just had the foreshadowing that within the next 5 to 8 minutes, something really awful is going to happen.
And, especially if they commit the cardinal sin of falling in love with someone, that means that, one or both of them. And so when you have preserved families, and I've said on here when we've talked before, you got Hawkeye's family, you've got the one family in the Eternals, with Brian Green's character. And then, and you've got Ant-Man. And one of the things that was a real strength in the Ant-Man franchise that they started in the first one and really hit hard in the second one was the reconciliation and the acceptance and love that can happen between former partners and even between a step parent and a biological parent who is the ex of his partner, to see how well they, not in the beginning of Ant-Man, they have beef there. But
you have to work through it.
Yeah,
but they get there.
The Ant-Man one ends with Scott thanking his daughter's stepdad for all that he's done as he tried to save her, right? And then in the second one, they have a friendship type relationship, all three of them.
Well,
right?
and the recognition that neither of them is the inherent bad guy for whatever thing. Like one is not the failed father who doesn't love his daughter, and then the other one is not the person that's an interloper, and and those stereotypes. Well, and I think that was the other part that, again, and you saw this right from the beginning, that whole opening scene and him giving all that backstory and talking about the work that Hope does. So the other thing too is here's a secure male that can sit there and talk about effectively how, oh my God, I'm not sure how I ended up with this woman who is so wonderful, so this and that, and even see him how he knows that he's insecure, because it is the whole the Avengers and writing the book and reading it and all. You can tell that there's a certain amount of his insecurity there, but he's actually thrilled with the fact that here is this partner that he has and that life is good. And then you do see the trickle down in terms of what happens with Cassie, where it's like, oh, look it, and he's and his kids managed to get herself into jail. What's up? Oh, wait a second. But instead of filching things like he was doing before,
like he was doing, right.
social justice stuff. So she's in jail, and she's shrunk a police car and all this kind of stuff. And then you get that again, the conversation over pizza, cheap grandpa. I buy the small pizza so that I can put Pim particles on it and get the extra large.
Right.
I'm not going to cook the thing, but I'm sure not paying for a full size one when I can upscale it myself.
And there is an awesome, once again, a blended family dynamic in this one. I would say one of the things, there were very few, but one of the things I was disappointed about was we did not see mom and stepdad at all. At that last dinner, I was like, they really should be there. But whatever, people still have different family events with different family, and so and
it seemed much more like the encapsulated family. Let's just keep it solid and not go in.
Sure.
That other,
I could see. I mean, it wouldn't have. I don't know. Whatever. Who knows? It wouldn't have, in my mind, been a huge deal to have them sitting at the table. I get it. But anyway, the other part of that is that you've got, with Hope and Scott's relationship. And I didn't pick up on, I don't know for sure if they're married, if they, seem like they're together though.
Yeah.
Enough that she is in a stepmom role very much with Cassie. And you've got grandparents who are fully embracing, this is our granddaughter, which once again, healthy relationships. And even Hank, who's kind of an asshole in a lot of ways, is just on board and accepting that, this is my granddaughter.
Well, it's almost like Cassie is Scott's redeeming feature. It's I've never been a big fan of you. Fine, you're with my daughter, but my God, okay, your daughter has got brain cells, and I can, if I can't work with you, I can. And then you see, and he's taken her under his wing, and he's just thinking, it's just stuff. And wait a second, quantum realm, what? And then that's where Grandma gets into the whole, on one level, great to see that you're mentoring her. Oh my God, what have you people done?
There's a great message throughout this whole thing that I think, yes, family, relationships, all that, but redemption was the big thing that came to me, particularly the dynamic of abdication and then redemption, abdication of duties. You got Cassie kind of coming down on Scott in a, you could argue one way or the other, and they do, where she comes down and says, you've abdicated, maybe not in those words, but you've abdicated your responsibility as an Avenger. You like to trade off the idea of being a superhero and Avenger, and that's where you wrote your book and your podcast and everything. I love that he's a podcaster, by the way. Yeah. And you know what? He'd be the kind of podcaster that would get all those crazy, he wouldn't just get Squarespace sponsorship. He was one of those ones that would get McDonald's sponsorship. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
and he would take everything because it'd be some sort of validation. Like, I mean, again,
he'd be
all that time, like, I'll let people think that I'm Spider-Man if it gets me free coffee.
Yeah.
And, you're the bug guy. You're the other bug guy.
Yeah. He'd be on the Maximum Fun or Earwolf Network, one of those big networks. Anyway, little podcasting insider for everybody. But she tells him, you've given up. You're not doing the things you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And then we also, if I throw in there with Janet, she did also abdicate, you could say, the responsibility or the opportunity, at least, to be open with the family and say, here's this whole world down there that even if it was like, I can't, even if I don't believe I can go back and save them, there is this whole thing down there, and I don't know that the old timey, they were pre-Avengers in this universe, but she's a superhero too. Wasp and Ant-Man. That's how she got down there, is sacrificing herself to save people, and she definitely worked as a hero, Avengers level down there while she was there.
Well,
but to then give
and
up.
Had the similar kind of thing where, again, thought you were doing the right thing, oh boy, I've just been gaslit by somebody with their own issues.
Yeah.
Oops. And, realizing that having done a good thing to help this person was not going to have the impact you thought it was.
There's a redemption that's in there as well, that I would say redemptive arc that I would think of as a sort of under the radar kind of a redemption, which is in the very beginning, Hank is using his technology rather than in the other two movies. I think there was a huge emphasis on proprietary holding on to it. And it's like, I've got this ultimate thing. We can use it to punch bad guys. And really,
this is my stuff. I'm the genius.
Yeah. And a lot of it had to do with protecting the tech. And then, in the first movie, it was almost all about protecting the tech from the wrong hands. So you could say for the greater good. On the other hand, it's, Hank's.
Well, and to watch how the ants would go down and then they would come back up, and it's like, and it's the whole, they've lived like, millions of years in a day kind of thing. They've evolved. And, I know socialism is like a loaded word, but we could learn a lot from them. They're basically this techno-socialist, society. And that, in a sense, they went off on their own outside of him and his proprietary stuff.
Yes. Good point. And he's using,
and then they come back.
He's also using it to do all the things that people used to say, like, oh, why doesn't he use it to feed the world? Why doesn't he use it for this? And it sounds like in the beginning, they're talking about that the Hank Pym particles are being used for some of those humanitarian reasons, which is very cool to see. That to me is a redemption arc, to where Hank is like, let me actually give back. He's been bitter. He's been lonely. He lost his wife doing good. And, he just hasn't been there. And so that's one.
He doesn't lose the grumpy old man vibe, but he's not carrying the same baggage. Like, he's still got the grumpy old man vibe, but with a totally different bent, or again, like you say, the redemption.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, and part of it that, we look at there is when I think Janet and Scott around the same time, they get down into that micro world, which, by the way, one of the things I really have loved, a lot of people really haven't cared for some of the recent Marvel things, but I've really enjoyed them delving into Marvel's weird aspects of their universe.
Oh my God. Well, and I loved how the fact there was a totally different aesthetic.
Yes.
It was like this weird, very like, again, biological, organic, gooey, like the visuals were very different. And like you say, it's that weird, trippy stuff. That it's not all glossy machines and high tech. It's like I have holes. Drink these.
Drink these. Yeah, that's that's the opportunity then the Janet and Scott have to then pick that mantle back up and say, we're in a place where people need help now. Nothing against, you can't really beat up on Janet for this because it wasn't her homeland. She did a lot of good there, but you can see where the people were hurt, just similar to, similar to anything. If there's Avengers around, do they come to Captain Marvel style? Do they go look out for cruise the universe
I
looking
think
for
it goes
people
back to your
save,
whoopsie thing.
right?
Like the first act of any good superhero is a whoopsie moment where
Yes.
they inadvertently do something that goes wrong. And I think that, what I love too about the quantum realm is that in some respects, it's this idea of, when we think about how we get caught up in our heads or we regret something. And it's always that idea of taking something that, again, oh my God, I said something to so-and-so 6 weeks ago. How did I word that sentence the right way? And it's this idea that it's a microcosm of something else, and yet it becomes its own universe. So in a sense, we create a whole universe over something that's literally microscopic. And then it becomes this other thing, and it takes on this whole other life. And so to me, the quantum realm was a sort of microcosm of different kinds of, like, again, whether it's regret, actions, like even when Scott starts to split apart into all of these different things, and then they watch him come together, and then at the end with Hope's help, it's just idea, and it was like, well, that's not supposed to happen, and it's like, well, no, because Scott's always fought all of these things, and now he's realizing what the goal is, and so he can bring all of his conflicting things together, and in a sense, does the thing that's not supposed to be able to happen, because that's one of his own little things. So it was brilliant. And in terms of Janet, like, it was, again, here she is stuck. She sees somebody else that's stuck. I'm going to help them the way I would hope they could help me. And it looks like I might be able to go back if, whatever. And then it's like oh God, I've just done a thing. And I think that's another part from a growth thing, is that if we are in some sort of, I'm definitely learning this in terms of like unpacking and working through my own PTSD, is that it's the sort of, sometimes you don't have the tools to do the things and you're just doing what you do. And so when you look back on something, it's not, I screwed up because I didn't know what I was doing, or no, you did the best that you could with the tools that you had at the time. And so you should, it's like holding yourself accountable with I didn't build the Taj Mahal, I didn't rebuild it perfectly. It's like, yeah, well, you had a rusty hacksaw and a broken hammer. You should be thankful you built anything. Doesn't matter whether it's, you're able to recreate the Taj Mahal to spec. It's you actually built a 3-story house pretty well, which is awesome in light of what you got. Yeah. So like, we don't look back that way. And I think that's the other part of it. It was there's a regret there, but she was doing the best with what she had, not understanding the quantum realm, certainly not knowing who the heck Kang is,
Yeah.
So.
No, she was down there, she probably didn't even see Loki down there.
Yeah.
And so to have, that's where you do have somebody coming in the role of Kang, who is using power in an irresponsible and evil way, at the same time doing so, as we see with a lot of these villains, they portray themselves and they look at themselves as the hero, right? Of like, now for him,
it's always like, something's wrong with the world and we'll just do it my way and it'll be fine. Nobody gets it but me. Thanos and the 50%, the snap, the whatever, because apparently extinguishing 50% of life is going to solve.
And really, as always, it boils down to this idea of, it's really about being the bully, being powerful, having that power of others. People say, and it's interesting because people say, well, why didn't Thanos just snap his finger and feed everybody instead of killing them? And I've always said, that's actually a message that's built into it, in my opinion, intended or not, I guess, but it's much cooler. First of all, he wouldn't be a bad guy, and we wouldn't have someone to fight in a superhero movie. That's the real narrative.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, why did that happen? Plot point. Because
we want him to be bad. It's like, hey, stop feeding everyone. But we find out which of the Avengers are against socialism and welfare. No, I'm just kidding. But you get into the fact that he didn't really want to save the universe. He wanted to be a god. Right. So that was his thing.
And that's the other part of it, too, is it's not just about plot. It's about, no, there are people that are like this in the real world. And I think that's that other part, too, that people, comics are all this and that and whatever. And it's like, no. Whether the comic books or in the movies, there's metaphors for other things here.
Yes.
And people will more sooner recognize it, or maybe I think some folks are losing it because you're having to like remind people in these little memes that, Star Trek was actually woke from the very first episode back in the 60s.
Exactly.
It didn't become this way last week. And it's the same thing with comics, is that, and these stories, that there's a lot of social messages in there And that, yes, just because there's boom, kapow, and whatever else in the frame doesn't make it any less important. And then in some respects, is what makes it an effective message, because it's not being lorded over your, held over your head as here is a moral that is trying to be taught to you. You get caught up in the story, and it organically it gets embedded. It's much more subtle than, mom sticking jam or sugar or peanut butter on top of, the medicine you don't want to take. It's a lot stealthier than that. It's whipped into the yogurt.
The interesting thing for me is there's, we see the journey there where, from Scott's perspective, he goes from this in his mind, basically in the beginning of the movie, basically he looks at it as a almost retired superhero.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, hey, why aren't you out there doing hero stuff? He's like, well, I saved the world.
Yeah, it's all done.
Oh, well, I loved Hank's react. He's oh, really? Wow, I hadn't heard that. That never comes up. He never mentioned it. But then one of the interesting things I noticed is that he, and abdicating where our responsibilities, let me back up and just say, I think a lot of times that comes from fear and intimidation. And here's somebody who, not necessarily because of superheroing, but he lost 5 years with his daughter. He was able to help to fight off this great, he helped to invent the time traveling that allowed them to go, and just all of those things that he was able to do. And there's that fear of like, I came right up to the bridge, they're right up to this edge. I helped this team. We did this wonderful thing. Life's okay right now. I can look around and just not look too hard and say, I don't owe everybody that. I need to be here for my kid. Mm-hmm. And of course, great power, great responsibility, as we know, Marvel message. So when he gets into this dangerous situation, I felt like there was this path to where he started doing Ant-Man stuff and hero stuff. He did it at first to save and protect his family, reunite everyone, protect Cassie largely. And then there was an evolution there to where at some point he starts investing in, we got to save these people. We got to save this world. We got to stop this guy. He's now fully bigger. He's back. Right. Yeah, exactly. He's out of retirement, so to speak. And I was curious what you thought of that journey for him, of his changing motivations.
Oh, I mean, definitely. Like I said, he came from that, especially too, when you think about it. I mean, he's always come from a place of insecurity. And of course, the way Hank, talks to him is, not exactly a confidence builder, And, so definitely. And that he'd found this comfort. But I think that's the other part too, is I think it was really, having accomplished these things. And in some respects, it was in that reflection of, gee, I don't know how I got here. And it's almost like, again, that thing about, talked about this before, as soon as the hero gets to the place where they get to go, happy place. Oh, look at curveball. Let's have some pizza. Let's get sucked into the quantum realm, boom. Little family adventure that we weren't, family, dinner turned into, again, family adventure. So it was that thing where, it was the, I get to have some me time. I get to do this. I've overcome sort of in some respects, the guilt associated with, again, what time he'd lost in jail and all these other kinds of things. And gee, I'm not at Baskin Robbins anymore. But it's that weird thing. It's about that crossing a fine line, right? That idea of, okay, is he enjoying it? And yes, they're taking some me time and some self-care, or has he gone just a little further into that abdicating responsibility, not, just coasting, the proverbial resting on his laurels and his track record.
That's a great point.
And then the wake up call that happens when there's the consequences of all, and that's the other part too. That whole getting sucked into the quantum realm is not just a consequence of, him as a parent with Cassie. It's about the consequences of a bunch of different things where, this person started, gee, you're teaching your granddaughter Wasp. And, wait a second. Yeah, but you wouldn't know that not to teach her this and that because, oops, I didn't mention this other thing because I didn't think it was going to have a consequence. And so you suddenly have all of these different threads come together and that lead to, oops, that moment.
That just, and that just hit me as you're saying, both for Janet and for Scott, Cassie is the one that opens the way for their redemption. Isn't that interesting? Because here's Cassie being like, I'm going out and being a hero. I'm inventing this thing to affect the quantum realm, blah, blah, blah. And they're both like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And it's like, now, certainly there is an element of they do kind of know what they're talking about. Of the same token, there is that sometimes that hating on the young generation for being, and I always think of it as like we teach our kids, and for the last many generations, people who are good-hearted people, they teach their kids like, hey, be more accepting, be more inclusive than my parents were, be more supportive, be more community-oriented. And then almost always there's an element of like, whoa, wait, hold on. No, I didn't mean
Except
that.
for here.
I didn't mean there. I didn't mean those people. I didn't mean this. I didn't mean that. I'm uncomfortable now. And then the next generation.
Or challenge authority, except for mine.
Except for mine. Yeah, definitely.
I'm sending you out there to be progressive and change the world. But in these four walls, I'm the boss.
And so, there is that dynamic of where that's where I think we need. I say we now being, past a certain age, you say we instead of us, or with we means old parents in my mind now. Yeah. I'm one of them. And so you look and say, we need that younger generation to poke us and have that energy. And they need us to kind of guide and say, as we saw even in this movie, when they start heroing, Scott obviously has things to teach her because he knows how to Ant-Man, whatever. Yeah. He knows how to shrink and fight and grow and fight. And so, you see that kind of like that all working together, and Cassie is activating them to action, right? To do something. Yeah.
Well, and even when she goes to rescue, what's her name? Is it Jandetta? And anyways, and it's the whole like, okay, so fine, you rescue me. What's your plan? That's kind of like where like the plan was to get you. That was it. Like,
Yes, that was it.
So she's in her early heroing. But you see, but that's the other thing is she is a catalyst. And I think that's the other part that's interesting because there are, again, these social messages that are in there. Again, the social democrat in me goes, like, oh my God. So we've got again, you've got the ants for starters. You've got the folks that have basically become refugees in their own territory under a dictator, and how they rise up, but just all the different things that keep happening, getting pushed down. And so the fact that she starts off with, again, I got arrested for doing social justice work. I wasn't trying to I wasn't being light fingered with something the way her dad might have been in the past. So I was doing something for a reason. I put the cops in their place, and I did give him back his car. I did give him back his police car.
Hot Wheels, right?
Oh, I found this, little Hot Wheels thing. Yeah. And so, so I think that's the other part too, is that a lot of times, and I've seen this myself, again, you experience different parts of it where you're part of a generation where, yes, you're pushing the boundaries and you're, speaking out about somebody, and somebody that, well, you're not as progressive as, you thought you were, and and you're like, you got to watch yourself, because there's nothing to say that 20 years later, you're going to be in this other place and people are going to be calling you out. So as long as you keep growing and you are willing to learn from the previous generation. And I think that was the other part that we saw, was that there was this willingness to learn. Again, it didn't come easy, but we saw it, right? Like even from Hank and Janet. And, so yes, there's the original, like, we're the grown-ups thing that they all start off on. And then as things go, there's like a recognition of, oh, wait a second, Scott can actually contribute something, or whatever. There's a recognition in Cassie that the younger folks have something that they can teach them as well. And in some respects, I would argue, even bring them back to their original core values that got them started. And that I think one of the best lines was, so you get, the opening and him reading the book and, but there's always room to grow. So you get Scott putting that out there. And then, you get her, you get Cassie when she's dealing with Darren, and the whole, it's never too late to stop being a dick.
Yes, that's
which is really a crasser way of saying the same thing. Like, it's not just about growth; you can actually change. Yeah. And that, to me, that was one of the best redemption, like the funniest redemption arcs ever. Whereas because again, like, talk about somebody that is caught up in his vengeance and again, and all of these things where we have this microcosm, and in some respects, like how MODOK looks, it's his head, because he's caught, like his head is just filled with all of the things that he feels have been taken away from him, that he's, all the vengeance, all the whatever. So literally he's got no body left. He's got to be this, because it's just a head full of rage, vengeance, and whatnot. And then in the end, she's like, just you got to stop being a dick. Like, and there's, but that's all I've ever been. No, it's never too late. And then in the end, how he comes to this place where it's like, I am not saving, I'm Darren and I'm not a dick and blah, blah, blah. And then, I'm dying an Avenger. And it's like, yeah, you know what? If that's what you need to believe, Darren, we will see you off as an Avenger. But the point is, he came around, even if it was at the last minute.
And this is where you see when there is a system of people, a community, family, whatever that means for each person, there is there's the forgiveness, right? We find forgiveness oftentimes. And even him who, boy, there's a lot of reason to just be like, oh, you're dying now? Well, screw you. But that's not a heroic way to handle it. But there is.
Let him think whatever you not. Oh, I'm like a brother to you. Sure, I was.
And it's like, there's often, right. It's kind of like that dynamic.
You were the doofusy little vengeful little brother. Okay, sure.
Yeah, exactly. You see that dynamic at funerals where, everybody's a wonderful person after they die or when they're in. But it really is where when you reach out for that and you make a real redemption, whether it's him, obviously he lays down his life to try to take out the bad guy, and then you see the same thing then with Scott, where he ultimately is willing to sacrifice himself and his life, and even if he survives, his access to his family, because I don't know that he knows that they somehow just opened the door again. Anyway, whatever. But that he didn't know that they could do that, I don't think.
Yeah.
And he thought, and I think many audience members, we also thought, because retirement for superheroes often means death. And, we're going to get, I'm going to mention a lot more
and
about
it was like,
that.
oh gosh, it's Scott and Hope just stuck in the quantum realm now. And
Rich, better than dying, but still. One of the turning points for that you can see is when he starts to allow Cassie to be a part of this. That all of a sudden, or gradually as they're going forward, he lets Cassie use her abilities and her dynamic energy to say she's going to be fighting too. And this might be a strange thing to compare it to. I'm remembering the words of John Brown, for anyone out there who knows the American abolitionist, John Brown. They just released a miniseries a couple of years ago called The Good Lord Bird. I believe, and where Ethan Hawke plays him, who was a very colorful character in U.S. history. Who he was a believer that slavery had to be ended by violent overthrow. That there had to be amends made, that even amends in terms of blood atonement by the U.S. to say we need to fight and even kill slave owners, So that's, that is what it is, and people can whatever. But one of the things that that I'd read, he was quoted several of his sons gave up their lives in this cause, in his militia that he formed. And when he was asked about that grief and that pain, it was very painful, but he said he was proud that his sons had been willing to lay down their lives in a cause that he believed in and they believed in. And now that's a little heavy, and actually a thing that really happened in real life. So I don't mean to make a comparison.
Yeah.
But basically, narratively, and in the story, we're seeing this ability to, there's an empowerment to watch our kids say that I'm going to take part in this. And it's like, ooh. And for most of us, it's not being destroyed by a time traveling warlord. For most of us, it's more, they're going to be mean to you. Oh, you're going to get you're calling attention to yourself, and you're going to get hurt. Or what if you're going on a protest and you get tear gassed, or someone, heaven forbid, you get killed or really hurt.
Well, and I think that's that thing about the larger sense of apathy that's out there. I mean, I know one of the things, in terms of some sort of recent things that have happened this year. I mean, I had stuff coming up on my social media related to protests going on in Israel and stuff going on in France, because I have, people that I know there, and they're uploading their stuff. And somebody that I know that also has folks in both places was coming across on a very sort of, I would say, conservative perspective of, oh my gosh, we have to stop all of this because of all of the things that are happening. And you're like, okay, well, for starters, both of those protests in both of those places are happening because government is not listening, and that any elements of things that were coming up that were, again, this person was, it was the whole, let's get all worried about the violence. And you're like, anytime a lot of this stuff happens, you get a lot of people that'll come in and amp things up in a way that they're not really part of the cause, just to, tap into exactly that. And so what I was like, you know what, you got to understand that there are some people that are going to come in there and do that. I said, what worries me more is the fact that there are other places in the world where the same or worse is going on, and people are just letting it go, and that they're not standing up against whatever. So I understand that this, yes, it has some things, and yes, I am worried about the well-being of whatever. But you know what? I've lived in Paris during like strikes and during all the stuff that was happening. I was there in the 80s, long before 9/11. So anytime the US did something, there's the Fnac. I showed my kids the Fnac record store that got blown up around the corner from my friend's house as a retaliation for what was going on. So the Libyans, there's different things going on in the politics at the time. So it's like, like I've lived and if it's Paris and you've gone 6 weeks without a grève, without a strike, some kind of social, like something's wrong, So,
wow.
Okay, so they're burning garbage. Why are they? So this idea of, like you said, that there's consequences, but it's like, what are the consequences really? And in some respects, are the consequences of sitting around doing nothing and letting whatever this is and get worse. To me, that's, I can live with a couple of weeks of burning garbage, or I can live with, I'd rather put my life on the line so that things get better than just sit by and go, well, not affecting me, not affecting my 9 to 5 daily, whatever. So I think that was the other part too. And that even came with the ants, so you saw how they worked with those folks, how they helped those folks get over that. We're just trying to survive. We're just trying to survive. Like that kind of,
right.
Just keep hiding off in corners and staying alive. As opposed to, well, no, or we've got some backup now. Let's stand up, fight, and let's see if we can make it better. And,
I think
they do. Now, again, there's the larger thing of, okay, but that even comes up at the end where you have him with this is great, this is wonderful. And then, but did I accidentally, he said there's more coming. And so like, to me, like the 3 lines in that film are always always room to grow. It's never too late to stop being a dick, but also don't overthink it.
And one of the great, absolutely, one of the great things about that is there's always room to grow. I think the very first time it's used, I chuckled at it. I even laughed like, oh, he's a shrinking and growing superhero. Ha ha, there's always room to grow.
Yeah, exactly.
So cheesy, and he's just selling his book. But then I think, and I think this is very well done because it morphs throughout the thing to being like, yeah, there is always room to grow. Yes, And one of the things that's super powerful about that, I believe that sometimes we get embarrassed about sincerity, right? And that's one of the reasons why there's always room to grow could be a joke in the beginning, and then you realize it's really not a joke, not at all. It's actually very, it's a very, when you mean it, it's actually a pretty deep concept.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes though, we're a little too cool for school when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? And say, how comfortable can I be with that level of sincerity to just say, yeah, there is always room to grow. And that's powerful. It's powerful in my life and in all of our lives.
Well, and that sometimes, again, going to that, sometimes when we grow, that means we leave people and ideas and places behind. And that sometimes our growth can actually threaten people. Mm-hmm. They are intimidated, and whether that's by intellectual growth. So we have, because we do have in Western society a very, especially here in North America, a very anti-intellectual thing. Oh, well, so-and-so's got a degree in this and that. And it's like, no. Again, not everybody needs to go to, post-secondary, and we don't need to have PhDs behind our name. But at the same time, if you've got an anti-intellectual perspective, and then none of us grows. And that you, in a sense, when people pride themselves on their ignorance, it's problematic on so many levels, both individual. So that's the other part, is that sometimes and again, especially if you're coming from a dysfunctional family, the person who is most likely, the person that's most likely to become the black sheep or the scapegoat is the person who, is pointing out things and is on a growth path that challenges the status quo of that little ecosystem. And so you do get a, in a sense, an anti-intellectual, anti-growth perspective, and that you get picked on for growing. And so, that's it. So I do see the growth metaphor there, exactly like you throughout in different ways. And even the fact that at that one point where it's oh, you're big, and they give each other hugs, as big, because, and to me, that's that sort of growth. He's grown as a father, she's grown as a superhero, and they're acknowledging each other as peers. And then, of course, it turns into the whole thing about citrus.
And ultimately too, can we really hold together and protect those we love without staying true to whatever values we live by, and the role that we play in being authentic in our own lives, as they are when the hero comes out of all of them. So,
well, and especially too, when you think about Scott, like even his, his initial transgressions, that you got him into jail, was about, on some level, he wanted to provide for his daughter, and he wasn't doing it well. And, and so it wasn't like he was, he was doing what he thought he had to do. But again, like so many other situations, when you don't have the opportunity, the tools, the whatever, and the only choices you're being offered are bad choices, then you're picking the lesser of the evils in trying to do something good. Like that's the place that he was in. And so that's the other thing, is that, he was given, like Hank gave him opportunities that he didn't have otherwise. And that's, I think, the other part of I would say Scott's larger redemption arc, is he's gone from, being that guy that was making whatever choices, he felt were in front of him, to, okay, yeah, he's doing these other things now. And maybe in some respects, that whole kind of coasting, whatever, almost comes from everything he's gone through and never thinking he would get there, and just I just want to sit back and enjoy this because it wasn't supposed to happen.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.